Because the goal is not to completely subjugate Afghanistan. The goal is to use Afghanistan to wash money out of the tax bases of the United States, out of the tax bases of European countries, through Afghanistan and back into the hands of a transnational security elite. That is the goal, i.e. the goal is to have an endless war, not a successful war.
Hey guys, welcome back to Neely by Nature. If you're new to this channel, my name is Neely. On this channel we talk about spirituality, law of attraction, social issues, international news, self-improvement, self-actualization, and so much more. So if any of those topics interest you, please remember to hit the subscribe button and support your girl. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to thumbs up and comment below. I love hearing from you guys. So let's get into today's video. Today's video is more about international news. It's about what's happening in Afghanistan, and I really wanted to make a video because I feel like the response from Americans about the Taliban taking over Afghanistan has been so eye-opening for me in so many ways. One, it just proves to me just how much the U.S. education system is failing Americans. And second, the lack of empathy and compassion coming from people, not just in America, but from many first world countries about what's happening in Afghanistan. I think that mostly has to do with people feeling like Afghani people are responsible for 9/11 and just like the attacks on America and terrorism altogether. And I really wanted to make this video to kind of address some of those fake news and just a lot of misconception and ignorance. So if you haven't heard already, or if you're not paying attention to the news, the US government decided to pull the military out of Afghanistan after a 2-decade war, where it was a war on terrorism, and they went there to basically defeat the Taliban and to defeat and destroy terrorism. And they left the country, and immediately after the Taliban took over the country, and there has just been chaos in the country, and people, Afghani people, are just trying to escape. The Taliban is notorious, they're dangerous, they are probably one of the most ruthless groups of people, and they are especially hard on women. You know, before the US took over Afghanistan, they really oppressed women. And since the US government has been in Afghanistan, women have been able to go outside, whereas before they couldn't go outside without being there with the presence of a man, or they couldn't, work, or they couldn't, obtain an education. It was very, very strict, and they used Islam to basically push this narrative, and it was definitely extremists who were utilizing Islam to oppress people in this country. And it's just been a devastating situation to see the Taliban take over the country after 2 decades of the US being there. I think a lot of people in America are just like, it's best that the US government leaves. If this country can't get their shit together, then it's not our problem. We tried, we spent $2 trillion on Afghanistan and the people, so if the army couldn't help, then it's not our problem. And I think that is the biggest misconception, that $2 trillion went to Afghanistan to help the people, because that is, first of all, the most incorrect information. So I just wanted to tell you guys where that money went, because I feel like a lot of people don't know how to fact check today. I'm just going to tell you guys where this money went, and I'm using Al Jazeera as my source, but many other sources have come up with the same thing. So if you don't trust Al Jazeera, because I know there's going to be someone in the comments like, oh my god, you checked Al Jazeera, like, you can check any source and they will have the same numbers. So where did $2.26 trillion go to Afghanistan? This is how much this war cost. So the first is $933 billion went to Defense Department war budget. The second was $530 billion estimated interest on war borrowing, $443 billion additions to Defense Department budget, $296 billion went to veterans medical and disability care, and $59 billion went to State Department war budget. So let's just talk about these numbers. Basically, the majority of this money went to military corporations. It went to funding this war. It went to buying weapons. The amount of money that went to building infrastructure in Afghanistan, which is absolutely necessary in building a society for a group of people that we technically went to save, because that's really how they really commercialize this war and like advertise to us like we are going there to, you know, free the Afghani people from the Taliban. So that's basically the narrative that we went in when we invaded Afghanistan. No infrastructure was built. Schools were not built. Hospitals, roads, bridges. These are necessities in building a society up. And the amount of money that went to Defense Department budget, you know, to buy weapons versus actually building infrastructure for a country like Afghanistan, there's no comparison. So we didn't really go there to help the people. Let's make that clear. Second, how much money actually went to ensuring that the Afghani military was going to be able to defend themselves against the Taliban? So in the course of 2 decades, $83 billion went to building and developing the Afghani army. Now, this is not to even say that this money went to the pockets of the Afghani army. It went to buying weapons. It went to making sure that people were paid. When you're taking $2.2 trillion and you're giving $83 billion to just building an army over 2 decades, and we don't even know how much of that money went to the Afghani people, and how much of that $83 billion went to building and training that army. Because how can it be that the greatest country in the world, with the most powerful military in the world, spent this much money to train a group of people, and then within a weekend, you know, because the Taliban just like literally took over Kabul over the weekend, how can it be that we, the most powerful military in the world, trained these people for 2 decades and they couldn't defend themselves against the Taliban, which was a group of people who were living in caves in the mountains? If the Afghani people were truly trained by America in the way that, hey, Israel is, you know, properly trained and equipped by the U.S. government. You know, Israel has a whole dome built that literally just stops any Hamas rocket from entering the country. If Afghanistan was really built like Israel, there's no way that the Taliban, the people who are living in who are camping out in mountains, could take over the country. So this war was literally built on making money, and there were multiple sources of income for the U.S., and they basically milked the shit out of Afghanistan, you know, whether it was for this war and for drugs and opioid, which is something I want to get into later. And it was easy to do this because no one cares about Afghani people, and that has a lot to do with the history of the Afghani people, and I really want to talk about that next too. But before I continue, I want to talk about how much the U.S. government actually spent to rebuild Afghanistan. So it was approximate that $145 billion went to rebuilding Afghanistan. Again, we don't know how much of that money actually went to building infrastructure and schools and making sure that this society isn't going to fall within 2 months, less than 2 months.
One thing that I think about a lot is a roads project that they started doing in 2008, 2009, the USAID and the State Department invested $400 million in a project that was supposed to build 1,200 miles of roads across the country. Cut to 3 years later, they've built 100 miles of road, and they spent more than $200 million, more than half of the money.
Oh, wow.
It's not just roads. You can see this in schools. You know, there are schools that were built and then shut down within a year. Schools that never had a single student in them, despite some reporting up the chain that they did. And hospitals that were either built in places where they didn't need a hospital or were built and they were so expensive to operate and they required all this machinery and they just couldn't be sustained. And so many of those projects have collapsed. I think it's easy to look at those examples and think, oh, those must be anomalies.
Yeah.
I think there's a temptation to do that. But if you look at the reports that the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction have put out, that looks at $8 billion worth of Reconstruction money that the U.S. spent since 2008, like $7.8 billion exactly, to see what the state of that was. And they found that only $1.2 billion worth of that money, those projects were still being done the way they were supposed to. The rest of it, who really knows?
Wow, and that's U.S. taxpayer money.
Yes, U.S. taxpayer money. And
$2.2 trillion went to fighting a war over 2 decades. And it's astonishing to the entire world that the Taliban wasted no time taking back the country. It's incredibly sad because if you understood the history of the Afghani people, because before it was the US government, it was the Taliban, and before the Taliban, it was the Soviet Union, who were incredibly vicious to the Afghani people. It was the US government who backed the Mujahideen, which was a tribal group of people who were jihadists, and they basically funded the Mujahideen. Members of the Mujahideen became members of the Taliban, which is what Osama bin Laden also was part of. The US government basically funded the Mujahideen to take down the Soviet Union. And the US government basically funneled over $20 billion to the Mujahideen to fight off the Soviet Union. It was actually Charlie Wilson, who was a congressman in the US, who kind of orchestrated this because he went to Afghanistan and saw the situation that was happening with the Soviet Union. And he went back to the US government and was like, hey, we should help and we can have great profit in this because we can take down the Soviet Union. The US backed this money, so did Saudi Arabia, and they funneled this money through Pakistan into the hands of the Mujahideen. And after the Soviet Union left Afghanistan, Charlie Wilson was like, hey, we can't just leave these people. This is a group of people who need help now. There was actually an entire movie about this. It's actually called Charlie Wilson's War, and I do hope people watch it because statistics show that most Americans get their news or get information from watching movies. But basically he was just like, hey, let's spend some money to build schools and to build roads, infrastructure, basically, after the Soviets left Afghanistan, because he understood that if we did not support Afghanistan, then Afghanistan would become a hub for terrorism, which it absolutely did. You know, after Osama bin Laden was banished from Sudan, he went straight to Afghanistan. What I want people to understand is that the US government literally goes into these countries and they push these narratives and they push their beliefs onto people, and they funnel money and cash and weapons, and when they're done getting what they want, it's just like, okay, you handle it. You know, it's like you light the fire and you're expecting people to just fend for themselves. And what happened was, after the Soviets left Afghanistan, the country basically then went into the hands of the Taliban. It was just an incredible, sad situation, and it's exactly what's happening again to this country. Before the Soviet Union, it was the British Empire who tried to conquer Afghanistan. No one's ever been able to successfully take over Afghanistan. People just try to use this country because of its minerals and all that it has to offer. Another point I want to make is that in 2001, Afghanistan became the world's largest producer of drugs. How can Afghanistan become the world's largest producer of drugs the same year the US government, the US military invaded this country? How does that even make sense? Al Jazeera did an amazing documentary where they went to Afghanistan and they went to investigate the opioid crisis that was happening in the country. And they found that after the US government and the US military invaded Afghanistan, the drugs that were leaving the country increased by 35 times. 35 times. That's the amount of drugs that were leaving the country. It increased. How does that make any sense? US military troops were told to not burn the poppy seed fields. The poppy seed fields is what creates the opioid. How does that make any sense? If we went into this country to save the people, to defeat terrorism, why is there drugs leaving the country? And how did this become the world's largest producer of drugs? We were there for 2 decades. And I want people to use their critical thinking skills here, okay? Use your critical thinking skills. How are you guys blaming a group of people that were just literally being used and abused by all these fucking militaries, all these fucking first world countries, the US government, the Russian government, the British government? They've used and abused this country, and the people, they deserve our respect. They deserve our solidarity. They deserve for us to stand up for them. And all the shit that all the shit people have been saying to have this lack of empathy and compassion and just like, yeah, our troops matter. No, what about them? Like, literally, we just use these people and we use them to our benefit. You know, I don't, when I say we, I don't mean us as the American people. I mean our government. I mean our military. Like, it's incredibly sad for me to see videos of Afghani people rushing to the airport. People flying off the planes because they just understand they don't want to go back to being ruled by the Taliban. You know, they'd rather die than be ruled by this incredible, disgusting group of people. You know, people literally handing their babies over to US soldiers. I can't watch those videos without sobbing, you know? Like, how are we not feeling compassion for this group of people? How are people just saying, like, yeah, it's up to them? Like, Joe Biden's response to him pulling out of the country was so, it just lacked so much empathy and compassion. He was just basically like, yeah, I don't really want to take responsibility for this, and I just had to pull out because our troops matter. Yes, our troops matter, but they matter too. Like, the way we pulled out could have been handled so much better. You know, I don't think that the US government should be in Afghanistan forever, but ensuring that the country is equipped to fight off terrorism is absolutely necessary. Like, that's the least we can do for these people after using them for 2 decades. I know many people who have served in the army and went to Afghanistan, and when they talk about the war there and like what was happening to the people, they feel they have PTSD. They are distressed because they can see what's happening in the country and the fucked up shit that was happening. Like, the US government was negotiating and in conversations with a lot of these Taliban warlords who were using children as sex slaves. Like, this is a real thing. Like, the US government didn't give a shit about the child sex slaves. Like, they did not care. They didn't care that the Taliban were abusing children. And this was so real. This was so apparent that it was happening in the face of US soldiers. Just like the opioid that was moving throughout the country was happening in the face of the US military. And no one can say shit. You know, like, people don't understand how much the US government does not give a shit about US military troops. And I really want to talk about that because it's like every time people discuss the US military, I feel like so many Americans get so defensive because they feel like we're talking shit about the actual troops, when in reality, the U.S. government does not give a shit about U.S. military troops. Like, the amount of women in the U.S. Army who are raped and then murdered, and literally the U.S. military just like pushes it under the rug. Like, there are so many documentaries and podcasts about this, where families of these missing women in the military, women who were raped, were like, I reported this, we've been trying to investigate, and no one can find answers for us. Like, this is how corrupt our U.S. military is. And I feel like people need to understand this, because the way people feel like they have to defend the U.S. military because they feel like if they don't, then they're letting down the troops. And it's like, let's be real. Like, a lot of our troops are actually being used. There are a lot of people in the U.S. military who are abusing their power, not just to our military troops, you know, people who are, you know, abusing women, but they're also abusing their power. They're abusing the people in these countries. You know, how many innocent Afghani people died in these countries? How many innocent people died in this war? And we don't care. We don't care because it's like, American lives mean more. And that's how they conditioned us to believe. Julian Assange, I inserted the clip of him talking in the beginning of this video, was because he basically was the whistleblower. He was just like, yo, the U.S. government is committing mad war crimes. And the crazy shit is, no one cared. Like, no one cared about what Julian Assange did. This is a person who's just like, the U.S. government is corrupt. The U.S. military is doing a whole bunch of horrible shit. And the response to that was, you're a traitor. You're a traitor. And it's just like, what? Like,
Eric Holder under Obama decided against pursuing persecution of Assange, of concerns that WikiLeaks was, quote, a journalistic organization that would raise First Amendment issues. Chelsea Manning was granted clemency. Chelsea Manning in 2010 released 750,000 classified and sensitive military documents that put our national security at risk. Under the Obama administration, she was given clemency.
Yes.
This is something that a lot of people who have put national security at first, I put myself in that category, have been warning about and warning about and warning about. And the only time the Democrats started caring is when it started affecting them politically, and Hillary Clinton's emails were released, and John Podesta's emails were released.
Does
and
anybody,
I, for one,
what's going to happen with him? That's my
so
question.
here's the biggest
I hope he rots
problem.
in hell, starting with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I like, can I weigh in?
Go ahead.
You know, I think that if you have a problem with Julian Assange and what he released in terms of national security, then you need to have a problem with the Pentagon Papers. You need to have a problem with the Panama Papers. You need to have a problem with the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs being released, because those items being released, I think, protected our democracy. And the reason that the Obama administration and Eric Holder decided not to punt, but decided that our Constitution protected Julian Assange is because our Constitution does protect Julian Assange. Because our Constitution...
I'm sorry, I got to push back hard on this.
You can push back after I'm finished speaking. The Constitution protects freedom of the press. It is our First Amendment to the Constitution, because I believe it's our most important amendment. So it is very clear that the Constitution protects information, investigative journalism, even if that information is gotten illegally, even if that information is a matter of national security.
And this is not a Republican or Democrat thing. Like, every president was trying to extradite Julian Assange to the U.S. and put him in prison. Even Obama. The fact that people did not care about if our military were killing innocent people because it's war, our lives matter more. And it's just like, where are you guys building your morale? Like, where are you guys creating your value system? It's just like my video where I talked about cancel culture and how people feel like they're doing something by canceling people, and at the same time they're actually just like a villain themselves, you know, where they're trying to end someone's life and their career by being a troll and like being an asshole to these people. Like, it's the same type of behavior. Like, I don't give a shit what we do to other people, but as long as it's not happening to me. And if you snitch, then fuck you. That's literally the response people gave to about Julian Assange. And it's not just Julian Assange, it's also Edward Snowden. Like, these whistleblowers were literally giving up their lives, willing to die to tell American people what's really happening. And American people are like, yeah, I don't care. I don't care. Someone else is taking care of it. And then the other people are just like, yeah, you're a traitor and you should die and you should go to jail forever. Like, when you remove yourself and you see this shit, is so crazy to me. I don't know, like, I really want to believe that, like, people are good, you know, like, I do believe that. But then when I see the amount of people, like, when I watch these videos, these horrible videos of what's happening in Afghanistan, I read the comments from people and they're just like, yeah, not our problem, like, you know, just becoming racist, and it's literally exhausting and it's heartbreaking. And I realize that a lot of people, they blame Afghani people for what happened in 9/11. And let's be clear, okay? Not one of those 9/11 hijackers were from Afghanistan. The majority of them were from Saudi Arabia. So why the fuck didn't we start a war with Saudi Arabia? Saudi Arabia was also part of the mission to funnel these weapons into the hands of the Mujahideen during the time that the USSR were occupying Afghanistan. It was the US government, Israel, Saudi Arabia, funneling weapons through Pakistan into the hands of the Mujahideen. So why didn't we start this war with Saudi Arabia? Osama bin Laden was from Saudi Arabia, which also, like, if you use your critical thinking skills, like, Osama bin Laden was from a wealthy ass family. Like, his family was multi-millionaires. Like, Osama bin Laden joined, you know, the Mujahideen, and he was funneling all this money and weapons into their hands. And it's just like, something about that just never sat right with me. And I don't want to be like a conspiracy person, but this is me just like thinking of this shit, like, you know, and me understanding that the US government is so fucking corrupt. Like, nothing really like, people, when people come out with like all these conspiracy theories about the US government, like, I'm just like, yeah, at this point I'm like, yeah, like, it could be. Like, I don't put it past the US government. When people don't trust the government, like, I understand that, you know, because look at the shit we're doing to other countries. Look at what we do to our own people. Look at what we've done to the indigenous communities in this country. Look at what we've done to black people in this country. The US government literally funneled crack cocaine into black communities, put black people into jail for using crack cocaine, when it should have been treated as a health crisis. And now that white people are abusing crack cocaine, it's being treated as a health crisis. When people don't trust the government, I understand it. And I just wanted to make this video because I just feel like the Afghani people really deserve better, and they deserve better from us. And I wanted to use my platform to bring attention to what's happening there, because it's such a fucked up thing. Like, I'm not Afghani, but I feel for the people. I feel for people from there. I feel for the people who are living through that. You know, people who have family there. Like, I can't imagine passing my child on to someone else and not knowing where they're going, but just knowing that it's better than being here. Like, I can't even process that. Like, I can't process what it must feel like for a woman there. Like, and then the the crazy thing about it is that on the other side of the argument is people who are literally like okay with the Taliban, like people who are thinking like, oh no, the Taliban is good for the country. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, what are you even saying right now? I'm reading these comments where people are literally for the Taliban. Like, they literally believe the Taliban is better off for the country. I don't know. Sometimes I worry about where we're headed, because it feels so stressful for me. Like, I feel like the world's on fire, and people could literally just do some research and check their sources, and they could really educate themselves, and people are choosing not to. Like, people are looking at the situation that's happening in Afghanistan for face value. Like, yeah, Afghanistan, they're responsible for 9/11. I don't really care what happens to them. Like, you can stop any person on the street right now and ask them what language is spoken in Afghanistan, and they wouldn't know. You would ask them, what's the capital of Afghanistan? They wouldn't know. Like, we were at war with this country for 2 decades, and Americans can't even tell you the language or the languages that's spoken in this country. And it's because our government literally wants to keep us dumb. That's why I was talking about, like, one of my previous videos on the importance of teaching critical race theory. This is not just about teaching about the history of black people, but social issues. What's happening around the world right now today. It's about teaching people about what the U.S. government is doing, and it's like, that's not what the U.S. government wants, you know? That's not beneficial to the country, to educate Americans. So it's better off keeping Americans ignorant, so that we don't ever give a fuck about what's happening to people. We don't ever give a fuck about these whistleblowers telling us what's really happening. You know, it's keeping us dumb enough and so occupied with stupid shit like cancel culture, where we don't even care about how our country is killing innocent people, how our country is abusing their power. You know, people are more interested in talking about celebrity gossip, talking about canceling a celebrity for being politically incorrect. You know, yes, those issues matter, but the way people can focus and hone in on that versus the actual problems is astonishing to me. We should do better as a country, as a group of people, and if I could create a video that brings more awareness to what's happening, and I feel like we should keep talking about this so there's more awareness about it, and we don't just let down the Afghani people once again. Like, it doesn't have to be like this. Like, this could be the opportunity for the Afghani people to take back their power, and hopefully through bringing awareness and showing solidarity, our U.S. government feels a pressure to do something, you know, to go back and help these people. I don't have a plan. Like, I'm not an expert in no means, you know. I think I'm a human being who can empathize with other human beings. I don't like the politics of all of this shit. Like, at the end of the day, we're killing people, and is it worth it? That's what it comes down to. Any war, any issue is like, we're killing people so that another group of people can have things. You know, we killed all these people so that military corporations can make trillions of dollars. And was it worth it? You know, that's the question I want to ask to all Americans. Like, was it worth it? Our taxpayer dollars went to funding this war, and we didn't even see that money. It went to military corporations. Like, we don't even have that money. They can't even eliminate our student loans. You know, like, they can't even, like, we spent that much money to just raid a country, a very unstable country. And I feel like people don't care because it's people of color. When it's people of color on the line, it's like, whatever. You know how much the media went in to find John Benet Ramsey or Madeleine McCann? Like, these were huge, like, international news, like international search parties to find one missing white girl. One missing little white girl. Meanwhile, child sex slaves are happening right in front of the U.S. military, and we're negotiating with them, and we don't give a fuck. We don't give a fuck because it's people of color. Like, child sex slavery is one of the biggest, it's the #1 crime happening in the world. The second is drugs. And the U.S. government does more on ending the war on drugs than caring about child sex slavery. Like, what does that tell you? It's because there's money in drugs, you know? The U.S. government wants to make sure that they're in control of the drugs. Like, clearly, we invaded a country, an unstable country in 2001, and then suddenly it became the world's largest producer of drugs. How does that make sense, right? Because finding children and getting them out of the hands of, you know, sex traffickers, there's no money in that. But there's money in drugs. You know, there is a moral obligation we all have. A moral obligation to each other. Like, at least to each other, right? Forget being Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal. Like, we have to also see that we are the only ones upholding the social contract. And the people up top, they don't care. They do not care. Especially when it's brown kids, especially when it's people of color. And we know this. Like, this is even happening at the border. Migrant children who are being raped, who are being sexually abused, and we don't care. But if it's a missing white girl, then it's like, nah, the media like cannot handle it. It becomes sensational. But when it's people of color, no one cares. If there's anyone to care, it's people of color. But people of color are so polarized due to colonization, the anti-blackness in all communities of color. So there's never any unity with people of color because we're polarized that much. But at this point, at this juncture, like, shit is, the world's on fire. And I don't know how bad it has to get for us to be like, okay, fuck the past. Let's unite. Let's be there for each other. Let's show up for each other. Let's care about each other's issues. I don't know what else there is to do. Seeing what's happening in Afghanistan, it's horrible. And the misinformation that's spreading, the lack of education, the ignorance, it's hard to watch. You know, it's hard to watch people have such strong opinions about a country that they know nothing about. Like, I was talking to somebody this guy on my TikTok was like, why are people bringing up the USSR? Like, who cares if the CIA helped fund the Taliban? That has nothing to do with today. And it's just like this was a comment someone wrote to me. Like, why are you bringing up the history of Afghanistan? Like, how can you not understand how important and critical it is to understand the history of Afghanistan? Like, it's imperative that we understand the history of Afghanistan, because it's what has led to today's current event. And I'm realizing this is one person, but this is a majority of the thinking of people. And I have to say, unfortunately, it is Americans mostly. Like, when I went to Europe, I feel like Europeans are more knowledgeable about the U.S. than people here are. That's why I was saying, like, we need to care. Like, we need to care about things like critical race theory, you know. And I don't want to hear that we don't have the time. Like, we have the time. People got time to cancel people. We got time to learn. We got time to show up to the courthouses and ensure, like, education is a priority, because it's really showing. It's really, really showing how much people lack education in this country. It seems like it's built this way. It's built to keep people uneducated so that we're always polarized, we're always misinformed, and we just don't care. And we just don't care. Anyways, I would love to know what you guys thought about this video. I felt really passionate about this video and just about what's happening in Afghanistan. And if you're an Afghani person, I would love to hear from you. I'm sorry that this is happening. Like, I'm sorry this is happening to your people, and I just hope that the situation gets better. I hope that enough people wake up and understand what's happening and start giving a fuck. Especially people of color. Like, I really hope that we open up our eyes. And yeah, this shit has always been happening, but it's like, how long does this have to continue? Because it's feeling like there's no end in sight. And I really want to be optimistic about the future. I really want to believe that there's more good people on this planet than there are bad. Anyways, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this video, and comment below. I love hearing from you guys. If you enjoyed this video, thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. It means so much to me. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys at my very next video. Bye.